Alright, got a very interesting critical thought today. I want to kind of create a supplemental piece to my thoughts on Prey, which by the time you're watching this video should either be up on Game Wisdom or be this video should be embedded in that piece wherever you're watching this right now. But Prey is a very interesting game in terms of its design and its overall philosophy in terms of player choice and balance. And I don't know if I'm going to do this for every review, but let me know what you think about these kinds of video supplementals. But I'm going to ignore the basics of Prey in this video because you should know it by now, and if you're reading the piece that goes along with it, that should fill you in. Instead, this is going to be more or less the spoiler talk. So, anything and everything that relates to Prey's late game, story, and whatnot are fair game for this video. So if you haven't played Prey yet, don't be watching this right now. But Prey in of itself is a very interesting case in terms of player choice and how they're defined by the designer itself, by the designers themselves. And going through the game, the level design is probably one of the best examples of this kind of, I'm not sure I would call it emergence, since it's still locked to the designer, but definitely more on the freedom of choice. If you watch part of the play we did on the stream, or have played Prey yourself, you know that for just about every given situation in the game, there's never only one option to get through it. And that's a very big part about this. Because typically we see designers fall into the trap of giving the player all kinds of options, but still railroading them in specific parts. Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, which we're going to be talking more about later in this video, was a very big example of this. This was a game that basically defined your abilities into combat or passive options like stealth and conversation, but still forced you into boss fights or boss situations. And this is where that concept of the false choice comes into play, saying that yes, you can choose non-combat options, but we're still going to force you into boss fights anyway. And to Prey's credit, and one thing that I thought was really great, there were no boss fights in Prey, or at least a fight in the typical action sense of I walk into a room, the door closes behind me, and now we have a bullet sponge fight for the next 5 to 10 minutes. So hopefully I leveled up my weapon abilities or I'm in trouble. And even for the sections that required you to fight or get around a tough enemy, there were multiple ways of doing it. For instance, during the whole military operator part, where the outside mercenary comes in, I found that instead of having to fight him, I could just hack the oxygen in his room and cause him to pass out. And that was a really great part. And Prey, while it does end with choices, it doesn't end with a final boss. Now, moving on from that, another big part what I liked about Prey in terms of its design were the items themselves. And this is where what we were talking about on Discord and during our chat came into play. That Prey is not a pure action title. It falls more on the RPG side, which again we'll talk more about in a few minutes. But every weapon or item that you had access to in Prey usually had a second or sometimes even a third point of utility. The Gloob Cannon, as I mentioned in the written piece, was one of my favorite items in the game just because of the utility it brought into the game. I could use it to create makeshift platforms. I could put out environmental hazards. Or I could even lock enemies into rooms just by glooping up the door in front of them. And of course the tactical option of freezing an enemy to get enhanced damage on them. But this again was a major part of Prey, and I played the game on Nightmare, and I did not use any Typhon based abilities during my first play. So I didn't even get to see the full range of utility options that the game offers. But the fact that I was able to basically get through the game with essentially half my available toolset, it speaks a lot about the variety and level design that the developers created. Now, another part about this, and we're going to start getting into some of the deeper parts or deeper discussions of Prey now, is how the game is more RPG than about player skill. As I said, or as we looked at, Prey is not a first-person shooter. And I need to take a quick break. I will be right back. I need to fill my drink up, and we'll continue this thought in a second. And we're back. Sorry about that, folks. This cold is lingering. It seems like it's the never-ending sickness. But getting back to our talk on Prey, we're now at the point where I want to talk about the abstraction that's built into the game. Now, what may surprise you, for those of you who haven't played Prey or seen screenshots, is that Prey is not a first-person shooter. Yes, you are walking around shooting enemies with shotguns, but it's not really built like that. It's an RPG, an action RPG, or an ARPG. I'm sure that term will never stick. But Prey is probably closer to both games like Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines and even Fallout 3 and 4, where while the game is played in real time, all the decisions, choices, and actions that the player has access to are built into the abstraction of the system rather than the player's own abilities. And this is a major part that I think gets us into a discussion about whether or not Prey could be considered emergent or not. Because as I said, everything about what you can do in the game is built into the perks, or the things you can upgrade using your newer mods. This is a game where putting a point into a perk magically makes your guns do more damage. Or you can sneak around enemy tactically, get the drop on them, and it still won't really matter unless you put the perks into the sneak attack and even into your wrench or firearm damage. But as I said, what this means is that a lot of the progression and growth in Prey is not on the player or the action side of things, but on the abstraction. And as I said a few minutes ago with Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, this can lead into some very big problems if your game isn't balanced around those multiple options. In Vampire the Masquerade, what could happen is I could take a double-barrel shotgun, walk up to an enemy, shoot them in the face with it, and do 5 points of damage. And then I unequip my shotgun, punch them with just barehanded, and do 30 points of damage, because that's where the abstraction or where my skill focus was. Now, thankfully, Prey, due to the item design and utility, gets around that kind of a dead-end progression if the player isn't aware of it. But it can still make the game a little lopsided in terms of its progression curve from beginning to middle to end. And you'll find the beginning of Prey, you are incredibly weak in terms of what your options and what you can do because of that abstraction. In fact, the game explicitly makes it a lot harder to avoid taking damage unless, you put that 1 point to mobility 1. And I'm sure some people put fully leveled up mobility to get that super speedy FPS kind of action. But when it comes to Prey's progression like this, it means that at some point you're going to hit that state where you have unlocked everything you need to beat the game, and then the progression curve just completely dies. And that's because of the fact that the game is focused entirely on RPG progression and abstraction. If this was an action game, you could introduce unique sections or new weapons or tactics into things. But because everything is built on that baseline of RPG or newer mod progression, there's only so much they can do without upsetting it. Like I said with Vampire, Arcane was wise enough to avoid forced combat, or sections where you must have so-and-so or you're in for a hard time. And that is definitely to the credit of Prey's designers. And like I said, I cannot speak high enough about the level and environmental design in the game. Now, with that said, the abstraction does become slower as you get further in, and this is incredibly true of the final quarter of the game. If you read my written piece, I said that this was the worst part of the game, and now because of this spoiler video, I can talk about why. But again, if you haven't played it yet, spoiler warning right here. But the final quarter of Prey happens right when you get the data to Alex regarding the Typhon, that kind of mesh, or I'm not sure exactly what they call it, I forget off the top of my head. But what happens is your parents hire an outside cleaner to come in and take control over Talos 1. And what he does is hack the operators, or the operator generators all around the base, and generates his own in the form of military operators. And these enemies will track you, they can fly, and more importantly, they can be infinitely spawned thanks to those operator deployers. You can block them if you can find them, but what ends up happening is that every area of Talos 1 for the final quarter of the game until you finish it is going to be spawning those military operators and throwing in a lot more enemies that get in your way. Now, they do fight the Typhon, which is a small blessing, but it creates that situation where all of a sudden you're now put into a situation where if you didn't get the right skills to accommodate or to get around, you're in deep trouble. For myself, at this point in the game, like I said, I have already gotten my build finalized, and they weren't that big of a deal for me. But if you were someone who only focused on one specific strategy or one specific tree, this was going to be a nightmare for you to deal with. And speaking of which, going back to the abstraction at hand, another major tell of games like this is the all or nothing approach they usually take to their perks. Now, unlike other open style games, as we talk about with stuff like Far Cry or Horizon Zero Dawn, where your skill tree is kept relatively basic in terms of its utility, in Prey it is a very big deal. There is a huge difference in terms of healing, for instance, between not putting any points in your medkits and fully upgrading it. The same goes for the sneak attack, firearm, mobility, and the like. And again, this is a way of both rewarding the players for going up these respective trees and giving them that idea that it's important to make these tough choices. If I'm going to go combat, I need all those perks. If I'm not going to use stealth, I can ignore that entire line. But if I do want to do it, it's important to go up that far the way. And if you're not properly thinking ahead like this, it can make Prey a lot harder than it needs to be. Now, with that said, this video is probably going to start to run a little bit long at this point. But I want to touch on the ending of Prey, and one of the more, I think, understated greatnesses of the game. And that is the fact that choices matter, or that choices are represented in your game. One of the big things that I think a lot of people complain about when it comes to choices is that the game never really acknowledges or rewards or punishes you for said choice. And Arcane, being masters of environmental and level design, really basically thought about everything the player could do and then had answers for it. As I said earlier with the newer mods, one of the biggest surprises that I ran into was I thought I could get around the fact there were limited newer mods by just going all in with crafting them. But no, there was a quest that locked them out until I completed them. Then there were specific quests, or for the final cutscene, the game, I guess, pseudo-grades you on your approach based on the operators talking about your strategy. For instance, they grade you on how many Typhons you killed, how many humans you saved, and I won't get too spoiler, even though I said this is a spoiler video. But the developers did a really great job of acknowledging the player's options, or what they did. A few minutes ago I mentioned when you fought the cleaner, what I did was turn off the oxygen in that room so he passed out, and then his body was left there unconscious. And I had a choice. I thought, I could just spend like the next few minutes just like hitting him with a wrench to kill him, or I left him alone. And then a few minutes later, I got a comm from the security officer saying that he disappeared. So I thought that was a very clever way of integrating your choices into the game space itself. And I wanted more of that in Prey, especially with these side quests. And going back to that final core of the game, Prey's biggest weakness, or I think the worst aspects of it, is repeating sections. This is a game where the first half of it, where you're just trying to explore each new area of Talos 1, is the best part of it. But when you're forced to repeat or go through sections again to get to a side quest or a main quest, it kind of breaks down. It's kind of like the difference between the first time you ride a ride at an amusement park versus your 5th or 10th time when you know exactly how everything works. And that's what happened with Prey near the end of it, where I already knew what was going on in it, so I just rushed through those areas as quickly as possible, and the mystique of the game, or the magic, was lost. And I really wish that the side quests were further developed. The problem with Prey, and with RPG-based games like it, is that all progression, again, is tied to a singular resource. In Prey, it's newer mods. In a lot of RPGs, it's the ubiquitous experience points. But the problem is, there's only so much you can do to actively reward the player like that. And again, once I got my build finalized, there was no in-game reason to do a lot of these side quests. There were a few that did change things, such as putting in the psychic modifier into the water supply, or getting the golden gun. I would have liked to have seen more of those, but conversely, they could have made it to the point where it could break the game. Like, what if I could find a super shotgun that did 3 times the damage of the regular one? Well, that would have been a great reward, but when I combine with all the other mods and the firearm perk, I probably would have broken combat at that point. And I also wanted to quickly touch on, again, there's just so much to talk about with Prey, the enemy designs. Each enemy in Prey, there's not a lot of enemy types in the game, but each one was explicitly built around a specific tactic and problem to cause the player, be it the mimics who would hide in plain sight, the technopaths who would spoil you if you made use of turrets or operators, the telepath who would punish you for not dealing with humans, and so on and so forth. But this is another really interesting point again about the limits and freedom that this RPG-based design has. Each enemy was designed around a specific tactic, which gave the designers freedom of giving the player variety. But it also limits you based on what you can actually use to fight them. For instance, with the Technopath, you better have an EMP charge, the null wave transmitter, or your stun gun ready, or you're going to be in for a tough time. With a Telepath, they are a nightmare to fight if you're just going to go pure combat. But throw a null wave at them and they are just sitting ducks. But that's the point about this kind of balance and design. That if you have the right option available, you're going to beat them very easily every time. If you don't, then you're in trouble. Now, I'm curious, for you folks watching this, what did you think of the Nightmare enemy? We talked about this on stream, but it's really considered the nemesis of Prey. I thought the idea was okay, but it kind of seemed more like a speed bump in the road rather than an active combatant like the alien in Alien Isolation. In fact, during one of the streams, I just literally sat in the bathroom of one of the areas for 3 minutes for him to then disappear. Now, I would like to have seen more tactical ways of dealing with these enemies. And again, this is always the issue you run into these abstracted-based titles, that players will run or will always follow the path of least resistance. What's better to you? Spend 5 to 10 minutes tracking a Typhon to lock him in a room with the glue gun or the Gloob gun? Or do I spend 2 minutes, sneak attack, follow with a shotgun, kill him, bing bang boom, he's gone? And you always have to be careful how you balance these options. And Prey is a tough game, I think, to judge like that, because I'm sure a lot of people played it on the easier settings and just brute force their way through, which you really can't do on Nightmare. But with that said, I'm going to wrap up this video before we get any longer. For those of you wondering where Prey would sit on my top 10 list of 2017, I think it would definitely deserves a nod or a placement on there. Again, for the environmental and level design, as well as just giving the player the freedom to go through it. I think it would be more or less on the, I would say the bottom half to halfway point. I don't think it would break the top 3 for me, just because, again, of my focus on action design rather than abstraction. But I would love to see the developers work on a Prey 2, especially considering how the ending basically sets it up for that. But I guess as a final spoiler question in terms of the plot, I guess that final ending scene in the chair kind of says that, in terms of canon, that Morgan doesn't blow up Talos 1 and kills Alex. But let me know what you think about the story in the comments below. But thank you for watching this video supplemental to my review on Prey. Like I said, if you want to see more of this for other reviews, let me know in the comments. But otherwise, check back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. And until our next video, have a great night. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Check back around 10 Eastern for regular streaming. If you'd like to suggest games for me to cover or topics to talk about, let me know in the comments below. For a collection of my writings as well as weekly podcasts on design, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the Game Wisdom Patreon, you can find us on there on patreon.com/gwbycer. $1 will get you into our private Discord channel where we talk game topics and more. $5 will get you voting privileges for any major event, including the Saturday Night Grab Bag, Patreon-funded goals, and more. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you enjoy more videos here on the Game Wisdom YouTube channel.